My name is Joanna, and I was 32 years old when my uncle stood up at a family dinner and told the entire table, my parents, my cousins, my grandmother, everyone, that I was dead to this family. Not pulled aside. Not in a quiet phone call the next day. At the table, with the bread still in the basket. His exact words. "You're dead to this family." My husband, Colt, was sitting right next to me. He set down his napkin, folded it, actually, the way he did everything, with a kind of unhurried care, and said, "I'm sorry you feel that way." That was it. No raised voice. No defense. Just that, and then he picked up his water glass. I didn't say anything at all. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I already knew something about Colt that no one at that table had thought to find out. Something that had been sitting quietly in county records and filed documents for years, entirely visible to anyone who looked. Nobody had looked. 13 months later, we walked into the grand opening of the Regional Agricultural Expo, the event my family's farming community had been building toward for 3 years. And the land title under the entire venue listed one name. My husband's. I grew up in a farming family in the San Joaquin Valley in California, which means I grew up understanding that land is not just property. It is identity. It is the thing that tells you who you are and where you come from and, by extension, what kind of person you are allowed to become. My family, the Hallorans, had farmed the same stretch of Tulare County for 4 generations. Row crops mostly: cotton, tomatoes, silage corn. My grandfather had expanded the operation in the 1970s when neighboring parcels became available at prices that rewarded patience, and by the time my father, Dennis, took over management in the late 1990s, the Halloran operation ran roughly 1,100 acres, employed a rotating seasonal workforce of 30 to 60 people depending on the time of year, and was considered, within the specific, self-contained social world of San Joaquin Valley agriculture, a substantial and respectable concern. I want to be precise about the world I'm describing because it has a particular character that shapes everything that follows. This is not a world of glamour or obvious wealth. The Hallorans drove pickup trucks with 200,000 miles on them and wore the same field boots to church that they wore to the equipment barn. Money was discussed in terms of yield per acre and water allocation and the price of diesel, not in terms of accounts or portfolios. But status was real, and it operated on its own precise currency. How many acres you ran, how long your family had run them, and who you married. Who you married mattered because farming is a partnership in a literal sense. The person you chose was the person who would be beside you at 5 in the morning during harvest and beside you in the bank when you needed to restructure a loan after a bad year. Your spouse was infrastructure. My family had opinions about that infrastructure before I had finished high school. I had 2 years of an agricultural economics degree at Cal Poly before I left to help manage the books for the family operation when my mother had a serious but non-critical health situation that required her to step back from administrative work for about a year. I stayed because the work suited me and because I was good at it and because, honestly, it was the kind of work I could see the shape of. The inputs and outputs of a farming operation have a clarity that I found satisfying in a way that classroom work hadn't. By 28, I was the de facto financial manager for the Halloran operation. I handled the accounts, the bank relationships, the water district negotiations, and the reporting for our crop insurance. My uncle Gerald, my father's older brother, was nominally the operational lead. He made the planting and equipment decisions, but the financial side was mine. Gerald knew it, and my father knew it, and everyone in the family knew it, and nobody said it out loud because in this family, you didn't make declarations about who did what. You just did it. Gerald had 3 sons, all of whom worked in the operation in various capacities. The oldest, my cousin Brett, was being positioned, quietly by accumulation of context, as the next-generation leader of the Halloran enterprise. He was 3 years older than me, had the right degree from Fresno State, and had the social fluency with the farming community that my uncle valued. He was not bad at the work. But he was not careful about it the way I was, and the people at the bank knew it, and I knew it, and occasionally I suspected Gerald knew it and had simply decided that the lineage outweighed the ledger. I am telling you all of this because I want you to understand the world into which Colt arrived and what it meant for him to arrive in it the way he did. I met Colt Brower at a water district meeting in Visalia in the spring of the year I turned 30. Water district meetings in the San Joaquin Valley are not glamorous occasions. They are crowded, overlit rooms in county government buildings where farmers and water managers and the occasional attorney argue about allocation numbers with the specific intensity of people for whom the stakes are existential. I went to 3 or 4 a year, representing the Halloran operations interests, and I knew most of the faces in the room. Colt was not a face I knew. He was sitting 2 rows ahead of me and slightly to the left, and I noticed him because he was taking notes by hand, actual handwritten notes, in a small spiral notebook, while everyone else was either watching the proceedings with the particular glazed focus of long familiarity or looking at their phones. He was 35, which I found out later. He had the build of someone who worked outdoors, not for effect, just from years of it, and the kind of sun-weathered patience in the face that you see in people who have spent a lot of time in fields. He was listed in the meeting program as representing a parcel operation called Brower Agricultural LLC. I had not heard of Brower Agricultural LLC, which was slightly unusual. In Tulare County's farming community, you knew the operations. They were not numerous enough to be anonymous. After the meeting, I found myself near the coffee station at the same time he did, and we exchanged the brief acknowledgement of 2 people from the same world who don't know each other and are deciding whether to change that. He introduced himself. I said I was Joanna Halloran. He said he knew the Halloran operation by reputation, which was a normal thing to say, and then he asked a specific question about the water-sharing arrangement we'd negotiated in the previous year's allocation dispute, which told me he had actually read the district records, which was not a normal thing to say. We talked for 20 minutes. He was careful with his words in the way that people are careful when they are used to being underestimated and have learned not to offer more than necessary until they know who they're talking to. He asked questions and listened to the answers with a quality of attention I had encountered rarely. He said 3 things during that conversation that demonstrated a level of agricultural economics literacy that was well above casual, specific things about capital allocation in row crop operations and the long-term implications of water futures markets, and then moved past them without dwelling on them, the way you move past a display of competence when you are not interested in the display. I drove home thinking about him. Not romantically, not yet practically. I thought, this is someone who is doing serious work. I thought, why haven't I heard of Brower Agricultural? I asked around. The answers I got were vague in a way that itself communicated something. Yes, people knew the name, there were parcels associated with it in the south part of the county, but the operation kept a low profile. Nobody knew Colt socially. Nobody had run into him at the equipment dealer or the feed store or the irrigation supply, which were the venues where farming community relationships formed. He was present in the records and absent in the rooms. I called him a week later about a water district subcommittee that I thought both our operations should have representation on. He said that was a good idea. We met twice about the subcommittee and then for coffee about something unrelated to the subcommittee, and by the end of that coffee we both understood something had changed in the category of what we were to each other. I told my parents about him after 3 months. My mother, Margaret, who had recovered fully and was back managing the household side of things, was warm about it in the way she was warm about most things, genuinely interested, asking practical questions. My father, Dennis, asked about the operation. I said it was called Brower Agricultural and was based in the south part of the county. He nodded with the minimal acknowledgement that meant he would be making his own inquiries. Gerald's reaction when he heard, and in this community, things are heard, was more pointed. He stopped me after a family Sunday dinner about 2 weeks after I'd told my parents, and said, in the way he said things that were meant to be practical and fair, "Is this the Brower kid who works the land south of Alpa?" I said yes. He said, "He's a farmhand, Joanna. He does day labor and seasonal management. He doesn't own anything. You need to think about what that means for the operation, for the family going forward." I said I appreciated his concern. He said, "I mean it seriously. You have a position in this family. Don't throw it away on someone who can't match it." I said I heard him. I didn't tell him that I had, by that point, done what I always did with things that mattered to me. I had looked at the records. The county assessor's records, the deed filings, the water district ownership documentation. I had done this because it was simply what I knew how to do, the same way I ran the numbers on any operation that the Halloran family had reason to care about. What I found there I did not share with Gerald, or with my father, or with anyone because Colt had not shared it with me and it was not mine to share. But I knew. I had known for 6 weeks by the time Gerald said what he said at that Sunday dinner. And I sat with that knowledge, and I nodded at my uncle, and I said I heard him. Colt and I got engaged 11 months later, on a quiet evening in late November, standing at the fence line of a parcel he'd taken me to see in the last light of the afternoon. He didn't make a production of it. He asked. I said yes. We stood there for a while looking at the land in the early dark, and it was the right place for it. The anchor elder in this story was not a relative of mine. It was a woman named Ruth Brower, Colt's grandmother, 81 years old at the time of our engagement, who had spent her life on the land in Tulare County and had the kind of authority that comes not from any declared position but from 60 years of being right about the important things. Ruth lived in a small house on one of the southern parcels, a modest place with a kitchen garden and a view of the orchards she'd watched go in 40 years earlier. She had the lean, unhurried quality of someone who has never wasted energy on performance. When I met her for the first time, about 4 months into seeing Colt, she shook my hand with both of hers and looked at me for a moment that was slightly longer than social convention required, and then said, "You're the one who does the books for the Hallorans." I said yes. She said, "Good. Colt needs someone who reads the numbers and isn't afraid of them." I asked what she meant. She said, "You'll see what I mean. He does things the long way because he believes the long way is the only way that holds."
She paused.
Most people don't have the patience for that. You might. She was right that I had the patience for it. She was right about most things. At family events, over the months before the wedding, Ruth would occasionally find me and say something brief and specific about the water rights situation in the district, about the price of almond acreage in the South County, about a particular parcel that had come available, and what she thought it meant for the region's long-term water picture. She spoke about these things with the ease of someone for whom land was simply the primary language. She never spoke directly about what Colt had built. But in every conversation she had with me, the outline of it was present, the way a shape is present in the negative space around it. Colt and I were married in April, at the small church in the town of Ulimart where his family had worshipped for 2 generations. 43 people. My parents attended. My uncle Gerald did not. Several of my cousins came, including Brett, who was cordial and slightly stiff in the way of someone attending an event they have been told to attend. My grandmother on my mother's side, Evelyn, sat in the second pew and gripped my hand when I came past and whispered, "He has good eyes," which was her highest form of endorsement. Ruth sat in the front pew and looked at the altar with an expression I would describe as satisfied, the expression of someone watching something arrive that they have been patiently expecting. The reception was in the church hall. There was a buffet and a 3-piece band and dancing that ran until 10. It was the right kind of wedding for 2 people who believed in doing the necessary thing without excess, and we were both content with it. My Uncle Gerald, as I mentioned, was not there. The absence was noted by everyone and addressed by no one, which is how the Halloran family handled most things that were too uncomfortable to name. The dinner where Gerald said what he said happened not at the wedding, which he didn't attend, but at a family dinner 6 weeks before it. I want to be precise about the timeline because I think it matters for understanding what the dinner was and wasn't. It was not a confrontation my uncle had been building toward. It was, I believe, something that came out of a combination of wine and accumulated frustration and the particular dynamic that forms in families where important things are never said directly until they suddenly are. My parents had organized the dinner as a pre-wedding gathering, a family meal before the ceremony, the kind that functions as a rehearsal for the togetherness the actual event will require. Gerald was there with his wife, Patricia, and their 3 sons. My mother's sister Diane and her husband were there. My grandmother Evelyn. And Colt, who was attending a Halloran family dinner for the 3rd time and who had, at the previous 2, been treated with the careful courtesy that people extend to someone they don't know how to categorize. Dinner was a long table in my parents' farmhouse dining room. The food was the kind my mother made for important occasions, a pot roast, roasted vegetables, her particular version of bread that required starting the dough the night before. The table was full in the way a family table gets full when a generation has expanded to its current size, with side conversations running alongside the main one and the particular noise of people who have eaten together their whole lives. The first hour was fine. Gerald was affable in the way he could be when he was in a good mood, telling a story about an equipment malfunction that spring that had somehow become funny in the retelling, drawing laughter from my cousins. Colt listened and smiled at the right moments. He didn't try to insert himself into the story. He answered questions when they were directed at him and didn't reach for the conversation when they weren't. I watched my uncle watching Colt during that hour, and I could see the thing that Gerald was doing, the assessment. He was looking for a place to put Colt in the taxonomy of men he understood. Farm owner, operator, manager, employee, day laborer. He was running through the categories and finding that Colt didn't fit neatly into any of them, and the not fitting was itself the irritant. My cousin Brett, midway through dinner, asked Colt about his operation, not with hostility, genuinely in the way farmers talk to other people they think might be farmers. What are you growing? What are your water allocations? What are your yields looking like this year? Colt answered in the specific, undecorated way he answered questions about his work. He named the crops. He gave the acreage in broad terms. He said yields had been adequate, which was a valley farmer's way of saying they'd been good without saying they'd been good, because you don't announce good yields in this community any more than you announce a good hand at poker. Gerald listened to this, and something in his face organized itself into a conclusion. After dessert, my mother's apple cake, which she made for every significant occasion, there was the settling that happens after a large meal, the loosening of the conversation structure. Gerald had had 3 glasses of wine, which was one more than he usually had at family events. He stood up. He didn't do it dramatically. He just stood up from his chair, the way you stand when you want the table's attention without calling for it explicitly. The conversations quieted.
He looked at me.
Then at Colt. Then at me again. I have to say something, he said, because I don't think it's been said clearly enough, and I think it needs to be. My mother's expression went careful. My father looked at Gerald with the look he used when he was deciding whether to intervene, and hadn't decided yet. This family, Gerald said, has been building something for 4 generations. Not just land, not just an operation and name. A position in this community. That position has value, and it has obligations.
He paused. Joanna has a place in that.
She's earned it. She does good work for this operation. He looked at me, and the acknowledgement was real, which made what came next harder in a way I don't think he understood. But the person she brings into this family is part of that position. What they represent. What they bring. He looked at Colt. You work land you don't own, Gerald said. It was not a question. You've done seasonal management work, day contracting, you've worked other people's operations for wages. I respect the work. I'm not dismissing the work. But that's not what this family needs to be connected to at this stage of what we're building. I think Joanna knows that, and I think she's making a choice with her heart that she ought to be making with her head. The table was very quiet. You're a good man, I'm sure, Gerald said to Colt, in the voice of someone who has reached the part of the speech that contains the grace note. But this isn't the right match for this family. And if Joanna goes forward with it, she's making a choice about where she stands. He paused. As far as I'm concerned, and I think I'm speaking for the family here, you go forward with this and you're dead to this family. The words landed in the room the way those words always land, with a completeness that makes everything else go silent. My cousin Brett looked at the table. His brothers did the same. My Aunt Patricia had her hands folded in her lap and was looking at her husband with an expression I couldn't fully read. My grandmother Evelyn, at the far end of the table, was very still, her fork set down, her eyes on Gerald with a quality I recognized as controlled anger. My father looked at his plate. My mother had both hands around her water glass. Colt, beside me, was quiet for a moment. Then he reached forward and picked up his napkin. He had set it on the table when dessert was cleared, and folded it in half, and then in half again, with the unhurried attention he gave to small physical tasks. He set it on the table beside his plate. I'm sorry you feel that way, he said. Not to the table, not to the room. To Gerald specifically, with a directness that was not a challenge, but was not a retreat either. Then he picked up his water glass and drank from it. I said nothing. I looked at my uncle across the dinner table, and I thought very clearly about the document I had pulled from the county assessor's database 14 months earlier, and I thought about the parcel boundaries I had looked at on the county GIS map, and I thought about the deed records I had cross-referenced with the water district ownership filings, and I thought about what all of those documents, taken together, described. And I said nothing. Because the right time for what those documents described was not a family dinner with wine on the table and my mother's apple cake sitting half-finished in the kitchen. The right time was something else. And I was, as Ruth had observed, patient. My grandmother Evelyn spoke. She said, "Gerald." Just his name. In a tone that had been developed over 65 years of being a woman in a farming community where men said things at dinner tables. Gerald looked at her. "That's enough," she said. He sat down. The dinner ended shortly after that. Coats were retrieved in the front hall with a thoroughness of purpose that told you everyone wanted to be outside immediately. Brett shook Colt's hand on the way out briefly, which I thought was the most honest thing that had happened in the last 20 minutes. Patricia touched my arm and said she was sorry, and then followed her husband to the car without further elaboration. Colt and I drove home in the dark. The valley at night in late winter has a particular quality. The flat black of the fields, the irrigation water running in the ditches alongside the road, the smell of turned earth that is always present and that I have always found more grounding than almost anything else. "That was hard to watch," Colt said. "Yes," I said. "Are you all right?" "I'll be all right," I said. "I'm not all right yet." "Okay," he said. We drove the rest of the way in the quiet that we had learned, by then, was its own kind of conversation. In the 6 weeks between that dinner and our wedding, my Uncle Gerald did not call. My father called twice, once about a water district matter that was genuinely urgent and needed my input, and once, near the end of the 6 weeks, in a call that began about the water district matter and ended with a long pause and then my father saying, in the voice he used for things he found difficult, "I should have said something at the dinner. I didn't. I'm sorry for that." I told him I understood. "Gerald means well," my father said, and then stopped, because I think he could hear how the sentence sounded. "I know he does," I said. "It doesn't change what he said." "No," my father agreed. "It doesn't." After the wedding, we did not hear from Gerald or Patricia for 11 months. Not for any holiday, not for any family occasion. My cousins texted occasionally Brett once to say he thought things would settle down in time, and I thanked him and didn't say more. My grandmother Evelyn called every Sunday, without exception. She asked about the water district work, about my bookkeeping clients. I had taken on 2 additional agricultural operations as clients since the wedding, which had expanded my working income considerably, and about Colt, whom she referred to always by his full name and with a particular kind of attentive respect that I appreciated without fully understanding until later. She said to me once, about 4 months after the wedding, during one of those Sunday calls, "Joanna, your uncle is not a bad man. He is a man who learned to measure things by the wrong ruler. That's fixable if the right measuring comes along." I asked what she thought would do that. She said, "Reality. It always does." The Regional Agricultural Expo had been a project of the Tulare County Agricultural Foundation for 3 years. It was conceived as a showcase and trade event for the San Joaquin Valley's agricultural sector, farm equipment, crop technology, water management innovation, and the kind of networking infrastructure that the valley's farming community needed but had never had in a dedicated facility. The site chosen for the Expo Center was a parcel in the south part of the county, selected because it was large enough for the facility footprint and the outdoor demonstration areas, centrally accessible and available. My Uncle Gerald was on the Agricultural Foundation board. He had been involved in the Expo project from its early stages and had put a considerable amount of his professional credibility behind it. The grand opening was planned as the signature event of the Foundation's decade. I had known, since those county records I'd first looked at 14 months before the Thanksgiving dinner, that the parcel chosen for the Expo Center had an owner. I had seen the deed. I had seen the name on it. 4 months before the opening, Colt came home from a meeting with the Agricultural Foundation's Development Committee and sat down at the kitchen table and said, with the expression of a man who has been waiting for the right moment to say something and has located it, They asked me to do the ribbon cutting. I looked at him across the table. As the landowner, I said. As the landowner, he confirmed. I was quiet for a moment. Does Gerald know?
I said. He will, Colt said.
The committee sent out the official program this week. My name's in it. I thought about Gerald's face at that dinner table. I thought about folded napkin and the water glass. Are you ready for that?
I said.
Colt considered it in the unhurried way he considered everything. I'm ready to do what I said I'd do, he said, which is donate the use of the land for the facility, participate in the opening, and then get back to work. That's it,
I said.
That's it, he said. I nodded. Okay, I said. We should get dressed up. The Regional Agricultural Expo grand opening was held on a Friday morning in late May, which was the right time of year for an outdoor event in the San Joaquin Valley if you caught it before the summer heat arrived in full. The facility itself was on a 12-acre parcel south of Tulare, a main exhibition hall that seated 400 for the opening program, 2 outdoor demonstration areas, and a parking lot that had been arranged with the specific efficiency of people who understood that farmers arrive early and leave when the work is done. The invited attendance for the opening program was approximately 350. The Agricultural Foundation had sent formal invitations to every major operator in Tulare and Kings counties, to the county supervisors, to the water district boards, to the State Farm Bureau representatives, and to the equipment and technology vendors who had sponsored the facility. It was, by the standards of the Valley's agricultural community, the largest indoor civic event most of those people had attended in years. Colt and I arrived at 8:15, which was 45 minutes before the program began, and gave us time to park in the general lot and walk the perimeter before the building filled. He wore a suit jacket that he had bought for the occasion, dark charcoal, good cut, over a collared shirt with no tie, which was exactly right for the room. I wore a dress in a deep teal I had found in Visalia 3 weeks before, simple and appropriate, and I had my grandmother Evelyn's pearl earrings, which she had pressed into my hand at the wedding and told me to wear when something important was happening. I had not worn them since the wedding. I put them on that morning without deliberating about it. It was simply the right occasion. The building was already active when we arrived. Staff and vendors moving with the contained urgency of people who have been setting up since 5 in the morning and are in the final stages. The exhibition hall had the smell of new construction, fresh concrete and paint, and the particular clean-cut wood smell of recently installed cabinetry in the vendors' booths. The Agricultural Foundation's event team had positioned a presentation stage at the east end of the hall with a lectern, a screen, and a row of chairs for the platform guests. We were met at the entrance by a young man from the Foundation's event staff who was moving through his checklist with the focused calm of someone who has rehearsed this. He found Colt's name, made a notation, and said, "Mr. Brower, you're on the platform. Diane from our team will get you settled when you're ready. She's near the stage. Is there anything you need before we start?" Colt said no and thanked him, and we walked into the hall. The room was at perhaps 40% capacity, filling steadily. I recognized faces, water district directors, county supervisor staff, equipment dealers I'd interacted with on behalf of the Halloran operation, agricultural lenders, crop consultants. The social fabric of the Valley's farming world, assembled in one building. And then I saw the Agricultural Foundation's display panels along the north wall, the donor and contributor acknowledgments, the history of the project, the listing of the key parties involved. I had been told about these in the official program Colt had shown me. I walked toward them while Colt was greeted by a man from the foundation board he'd worked with on the site donation agreement. The panels were well produced, printed on heavy board stock, professionally designed, mounted at intervals the length of the north wall. The first 3 panels covered the Foundation's history and the Expo project's development. The 4th panel was titled Facility Development, and it listed, under the heading Site Contribution, the following. The Tulare County Regional Agricultural Expo is built on land generously donated for use by Brower Agricultural LLC, Colt J. Brower, Principal. The Foundation gratefully acknowledges Mr. Brower's contribution of a 12-acre parcel in southern Tulare County, valued at current market assessment of $480,000, as the foundational gift enabling this facility. $480,000. A number inside the story's rules. Legible, real, the actual assessed value of agricultural land at current market rates in that part of the valley. Not a cash payment, not a windfall. A land title. A piece of ground that Colt had owned for 11 years, accumulated parcel by parcel in the quiet way that Ruth had described. The long way, because the long way is the only way that holds. I read the panel twice. Then I stepped back and looked at the room. About 150 people in the hall by this point, moving through the vendor area, finding their seats. The panel was visible to anyone who walked the north wall, which was the natural path from the entrance to the seating area. Several people had already stopped at it. I watched a woman I recognized as a county supervisor's aide read the site contribution section and turned to the person beside her. I did not go to my seat yet. I walked back toward the entrance and found my grandmother Evelyn, who had arrived with my parents and was making her way through the door in the measured way she moved through all doors, as if she had time and intended to use it correctly. She was 83 now, and she had dressed for the occasion in the way she dressed for all occasions that mattered, neatly, with intention, the same small gold brooch she had worn at my parents' wedding fastened at the collar of her jacket. She saw me and took both my hands the way Ruth had done that first time. "You look well," she said.
"Thank you," I said.
She looked around the hall. "He's the one with the panel on the north wall."
"He is," I said.
She patted my hands once, firmly. "I'll find my seat," she said, and moved away. I was looking for my parents when I found Gerald. He was standing near the center of the hall with two of the other foundation board members, in the configuration of men who have organized something and are watching it come together with the satisfaction of investment. He was dressed well. Gerald always dressed well for civic occasions. It was part of how he understood his role in the community. He was speaking to the man beside him and had not yet looked toward the north wall. He had not yet read the panel. I watched him for a moment from across the room. He looked exactly as he always looked at these events, confident, comfortable in his element. The man who had stood up at a family dinner and told his niece she was dead to the family in this context was simply the man who had helped build this thing and was proud of it. I thought about how long it had been since that dinner. 13 months, 3 weeks. I thought about the drive home in the dark and the smell of the irrigation ditches. I found a seat in the third row on the aisle. Colt was on the platform, visible from where I sat, speaking quietly with the foundation's executive director. He looked at ease in the way he looked at ease in everything. He caught my eye once briefly, and I gave him a small nod, and he gave one back, and that was the entirety of the communication we needed. The room filled toward its capacity. The program was scheduled for 9 o'clock. At 8:52, I watched my Uncle Gerald walk toward the north wall. He was still in conversation with the man beside him when he reached the panels. He moved along them with the semi-attentive scan of someone who has seen the content before, in draft form, in board meetings. He passed the first 3 panels. He reached the 4th. He read it. I watched the moment it landed. His hands, which had been moving slightly in the way they moved when he talked, he was a man who gestured, who expressed himself physically in conversation, went still. Completely still. His shoulders, which had been in the forward lean of active conversation, settled back in a way that was not a relaxation. The man beside him said something, and Gerald's head turned back toward him with a half-second delay, the delay of someone whose processing has been interrupted and is managing the interruption. Then the man beside him followed Gerald's gaze to the panel. "Read it," said something I couldn't hear from across the room. Gerald looked at the panel again. Then he looked across the room. He found me before he found Colt. I don't know why that was. Perhaps because I was the one he was looking for, the one whose presence in this room had always been his context for Colt's presence in this room. He found my face in the filling hall, and I was sitting in the third row with my grandmother Evelyn's pearl earrings and my hands folded in my lap, and I looked back at him. I did not look away. I did not perform anything. I just let him see me sitting there. His face went through something complicated and private that I had no name for and did not reach for. His color had shifted slightly, the specific pallor that appears when blood has been redirected by the body toward processing something unexpected. He stood very still in the way that large, self-certain men go still when the ground is moved. Then the foundation's event director called the room to attention, and Gerald went to his seat. The program opened with the Agricultural Foundation's executive director, a woman named Sandra Briggs, who had spent 20 years in Valley agricultural policy and had the specific authority of someone who has navigated bureaucratic and political terrain without losing either her composure or her principles. She welcomed the room, 340 people, by my count of the filled seats, and spoke for 8 minutes about the Foundation's history, the Expo project's development, and what she believed the facility would mean for the region's agricultural community over the next generation. She was good at this. Clear, specific, unhurried. She knew what she was describing and believed in it, and rooms can always tell the difference. Then she said, "Before we cut the ribbon and open these doors, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the contribution that made this possible." The room settled into the particular attention of an audience that is about to hear something that explains where they are. This facility sits on land that was donated for the Foundation's use by a Tulare County farmer who has been running operations in the south part of this county for 11 years, Sandra said. He declined public acknowledgement for most of the planning process. Some of you on the board will remember that we had several conversations about whether we could list his name in the materials at all. She smiled slightly. He eventually agreed, on the condition that we keep it brief. A small, knowing sound moved through the room. Colt Brower has farmed 1,200 acres in southern Tulare County since he was 24 years old, Sandra continued. He built that operation parcel by parcel, without debt, without investors, without publicity. He donates water allocation from his parcels to 2 neighboring small operations every drought year. He has been contributing to the Valley's farming community for over a decade without announcing that he was doing it. She paused. He donated the land under this building because he believed the community needed the facility, and he had a piece of ground that could make it happen. That is the full extent of his stated reasoning. She looked toward the platform.
"Colt," she said. Colt stood.
He buttoned his jacket, a single button, the practiced gesture of a man who doesn't wear suits often but has learned to wear them correctly, and he walked to the lectern with the same unhurried pace he brought to everything. He thanked Sandra. He thanked the Foundation board. He said he was glad the facility had come together and that he was looking forward to what the community would build with it. He spoke for 3 minutes exactly. Then he stepped back to his chair. The room applauded with the specific warmth of a room that has just had its frame rearranged. Because that was what had happened. 340 people in the hall, most of whom had come to this event with the social map they'd carried for years, who owned what, who worked for whom, what the names in this community meant, and in what order, had just had that map updated in public with documentary specificity. The man on the platform was not a farmhand. He was not a day laborer or a seasonal contractor, or any of the things that the taxonomy of this community had quietly assigned him. He was the largest individual landowner in the room. He had donated a parcel valued at nearly $500,000 because the community needed it. He had been doing this quietly for 11 years. I sat in the third row with my hands in my lap and watched the room process this. I watched a water district director I recognized lean toward the woman beside him and say something. I watched a county supervisor's aide look at the north wall panel and then back at the platform. I watched 2 equipment dealers near the aisle exchange the look of men recalculating something. And I watched my Uncle Gerald. He was 4 rows back and 2 seats to the right, and he was very still in a way I had not seen him still before. His hands were flat on his thighs. His face had the quality of a man doing something difficult in private while in public. His wife Patricia was beside him, and she was looking at her program, and she was not looking at him, which told me she had made a choice about what to attend to in this moment. My grandmother Evelyn, in the seat beside me, reached over and placed her hand on my arm for a moment. Just a moment, light and certain, and then withdrew it. I looked at the platform. Colt was sitting in his chair with his jacket buttoned and his hands resting on his knees, listening to the next portion of the program with the attentiveness he brought to things he had decided mattered. He was not looking at the family section. He was not scanning the room for the reactions he'd known were coming. He was just there, present, the same man he had always been. After the program and the ribbon cutting, which Colt performed with a pair of scissors a staff member handed him, and a single clean cut and a handshake with Sandra, the hall opened into its event configuration. People moved toward the vendor area, toward the demonstration exhibits, toward each other in the fluid social realignment of a crowd that has been seated and is now released. A man I didn't know introduced himself to Colt as representing a regional farm credit institution and said he'd been following Brower Agricultural's development with interest and would welcome a conversation at some point. Colt thanked him and said he'd be in touch. A woman from the county supervisor's office found me specifically and said she hadn't realized Colt was my husband and that she had worked on the parcel documentation for the donation and that he'd been the most straightforward party in any real estate transaction she'd processed in 5 years. No complications, she said. No conditions beyond the use agreement. He just handed them the deed and said make something good. I thanked her. The foundation board's vice chair, a man named Phil who I'd met twice at water district meetings, shook my hand and said, "We tried to get him to put his name on the building. He wouldn't do it. Said a building doesn't need a name. It needs to be useful." He shook his head slightly. 1,200 acres, 11 years, and nobody in this room knew. He wasn't hiding, I said. He just wasn't announcing. Phil thought about that for a moment. No, he said. He wasn't. I had not looked for Gerald. He found me. He came across the hall about 40 minutes after the program ended, moving with a deliberateness that told me he had been deciding whether to do this and had decided yes. He was alone. Patricia was visible near the entrance, speaking with another woman. He stopped in front of me and was quiet for a moment that was longer than was comfortable. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't," I said. Another pause. "How long have you known?" 14 months before the dinner, I said. "I pulled the county records. That's what I do." His face did something I watched carefully, a shift that passed through several stages before it arrived somewhere I could read. Not anger. Not precisely shame, either, though that was part of it. Something that was arriving at a reckoning with his own methodology, the instrument he'd used to measure Colt, and what that instrument had missed. "I should have looked harder," he said. "Yes," I said. "You should have." He looked toward the platform where Colt was now speaking with Sandra and the foundation director. "He's a remarkable man." "He is," I said. A pause. I said things I shouldn't have said. I looked at him. "You said I was dead to this family." He met my eyes. I know what I said. I let the silence hold for a moment because it deserved to. Then I said, "We'll see, Gerald." He nodded. He extended his hand. I looked at it for a beat, not long, just enough, and then I shook it. He walked back toward Patricia. I found a glass of water from a catering station nearby and drank it standing near the north wall, looking at the panel, looking at Colt's name in print in the way it had been in those county records for 11 years, waiting for the right room. The grand opening social aftermath moved through the community the way things move through farming communities, not through press releases or announcements, but through the accumulation of conversations at equipment dealers and water district meetings and the kind of early morning phone calls that function as the Valley's informal information network. By the following Monday, the story was known. Not a story anyone had told as a story. It was simply the facts, as Sandra had stated them from the lectern, circulating through the people who'd been there and the people who knew the people who'd been there. 1,200 acres. 11 years. The land donation valued at nearly $500,000. The founder of a significant agricultural operation in the South County who had been consistently misidentified in community conversation as a day laborer. My Uncle Gerald had been on the Agricultural Foundation Board. He had been, visibly and publicly, one of the civic leaders behind the Expo project. And the land under the project had been given by the man he'd told to leave his family. Nobody said that last part out loud. They didn't need to. My father called on Saturday, 2 days after the opening. He said he'd heard from 3 different people at the event before he'd even gotten to his truck. He said he was proud of Colt and sorry it had taken this long, and that he thought Gerald would be calling me when he'd found the right words. I said I appreciated it. He said he'd been wrong to stay quiet at the dinner. I told him I knew that already, and that I forgave him for it, which I did. My grandmother Evelyn called on Sunday, as she always did. She said simply, "Colt was very dignified." I said yes. She said, "Ruth would have been pleased." Ruth had passed the previous autumn, quietly, in her sleep, in the small house with a kitchen garden, and it was the first time Evelyn had mentioned her to me. I thanked her for that. Gerald called 11 days after the opening. He had waited, I think, because he needed to find the right arrangement of words, and he was not a man who found that quickly. When he did call, it was on a Wednesday evening, and he spoke in the measured way of someone who has prepared what he wants to say and is reading it slightly. He said he had been wrong about Colt. He said he had made a judgment based on incomplete information and had expressed it in a way that was not acceptable and that had caused damage he was responsible for. He said he would like, if we were willing, to meet, not a large family occasion, just us and him and Patricia, and to say in person what needed to be said. I told him I would talk to Colt. Colt, when I told him that evening, was quiet for a moment. We were in the kitchen after dinner, the particular quiet of a weekday evening with the fields outside going dark.
"What do you want to do?" he said.
I thought about it honestly. I want to hear him say it in person, I said. I want Patricia to be there. I want it to be on a Saturday at our house, not theirs.
Colt nodded.
That seems right.
"You're not angry at him," I said.
It was not a question. I was, he said, for about a week after the dinner. Then I decided it wasn't useful. He looked at me. What matters is you. What do you want? I thought about the drive home that February night, the irrigation ditches, the dark flat fields. I want to give him the chance, I said. Once. Okay, Colt said. Invite them. The meeting at our house happened on a Saturday in July. Patricia brought a pie, which was the gesture of a woman who communicates through food and whose pie said, I am also sorry, and I did not know how to say so at the dinner. Gerald sat across from Colt at our kitchen table and said, without preamble or arrangement, the thing he'd organized over 11 days on the phone. I was wrong about who you were. I said things that can't be unsaid. I'm asking your forgiveness, and I understand if it takes time. Colt said, I appreciate that, Gerald. Not, I forgive you.
Not yet.
But, I appreciate that. Which was the honest response, and Colt did not give dishonest ones.
Gerald looked at me.
You knew, he said. At the dinner. You knew the whole time. I knew, I said. Why didn't you say anything? I thought about how to say the true thing. Because you needed to find it yourself, I said. And you needed to find it in a room where I hadn't put it there. He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, slowly, with the nod of someone arriving at something they'd been working toward. That's your grandmother's way of thinking, he said. Yes, I said. It is. Patricia served the pie. We ate it at the kitchen table and talked about the water district allocation for the coming year and the equipment auction in Fresno the following month, and whether the Foundation's second phase of the Expo project would come together on timeline. We talked about the things farmers talk about. The conversation had the quality, by the end of it, of something that was not fully repaired but was no longer pretending to be. That was enough for that day. My cousin Brett called a few weeks later and asked if he could come by and see the operation sometime. I said yes. Come in the morning when the light is good. He came on a Thursday, and Colt showed him around the south parcels with the thoroughness he applied to anything someone asked him to explain. Brett asked good questions and listened to the answers. On the way back to the house, he said to me, walking, he's the most competent person I've ever met on 40 acres. I said, try 1,200. Brett laughed. It was the first real laugh we'd had together in over a year. Here is what I've come to understand in the time since that opening. The people in my family were not wrong, because they were unkind. My Uncle Gerald is not an unkind man. He was working with a ruler he'd been handed, the valley's ruler, the one that measures invisible acres and established names and legible credentials. He applied it to Colt and got the wrong answer, because the ruler was the wrong instrument. But here's the thing I keep returning to, the information was available. It had been available for 11 years, in the county assessor's records, in the water district filings, in the deed documentation that anyone with a county login and 20 minutes could have pulled up. Gerald didn't look, because he thought he already knew. He had a category and he put Colt in it and stopped checking. Colt never asked anyone to look harder. He never led with the information. He built what he built, parcel by parcel, drought year by drought year, the long way, because he believed the long way was the only way that held. He didn't need the community's validation to keep building. He wasn't building for the room.
But the room found him anyway.
That is what rooms do. The lesson I take from this is not about humility, exactly, or about patience, though those things are in it. It is about the difference between a ruler and a record. A ruler is what you bring to a measurement. A record is what's actually there. My uncle measured Colt with his ruler and found him wanting. The county record told the truth that the ruler missed. In the end, it is always the record that matters. That's my story. A folded napkin at a family dinner table, a panel on the north wall of an exhibition hall that nobody had thought to check, and a Saturday afternoon pie eaten in a kitchen where the conversation finally went somewhere real. Here is what I want to ask you, and I want you to think about it before you answer. Has someone in your life ever been written off by a family, by a community, by a room full of people with their minds already made up, and been carrying something the whole time that none of them knew about? And when it came out, what was the thing that actually changed? The information or the people? Drop your answer in the comments. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.